Asajj Ventress is back, and she brought warnings of a dark future with her, which is appropriate for an episode titled The Harbinger. She didn't bring us much in the way of answers, which is fine, but I do think that held this week's story back a bit. The entire episode takes place on Pabu, which is always a welcome sight for as long as we have it. It's nice to see Crosshair becoming a welcomed part of the community, even if he only grunts his "you're welcomes" to his neighbors. It's nice, but I wouldn't have minded seeing a little more. We could check in with the young clone cadets Hunter and Wrecker saved back at the start of the season. Including a scene with Omega and Liana could have worked well, since Pabu is meant to be a symbol of Omega's chance at friends her age and a normal life. It would have been a nice contrast to her scenes with Ventress and what we learn later on. And we quickly get to Asajj as Batcher and Omega stumble upon her ship. I didn't love episode 8, but I was right that it did allow for Ventress to quickly jump into the story without much explanation. Finnick told her to seek out the clones, and so she did. But how did she find Pabu? She says she has her ways. A lot of the answers she gives aren't that satisfying, at least for now. I think it's reasonable that she could have had help from Quinlan Vos. We know he's still alive by the time of Obi-Wan Kenobi, which is much later in the timeline. He and Asajj were a team in the book Dark Disciple, and his gifts in psychometry gave them a huge advantage as bounty hunters. Maybe Finnick swiped something of Hunter's, and then Quinlan used it to find Pabu or something like that. Ventress explains midichlorians, and opens up the possibility that clones, particularly Omega, might have potential in the Force. And so she starts testing the young clone while Hunter and the others watch nearby, and they confirm their suspicions that Asajj was their enemy during the Clone Wars. The tension mounts, and both Omega and Ventress become distracted. Asajj sends her off on another test so she and the batch can hash things out. Hunter says they're stepping in after realizing, quote, "who you are." It's funny that mentally I expected the line to be "who you were," but as far as Hunter and the others are concerned, Asajj Ventress is still a separatist assassin. Whether or not you read Dark Disciple, I think it's clear that she has changed, but there's no way for the batch to know that. I actually think this scene might have played out better for people who hadn't read the book. I think there would have been more tension, wondering how much Asajj had changed, wondering how far she would take the fight, and maybe being surprised when she ignited a yellow lightsaber instead of a red one. The fight itself was a lot of fun. Of course, Hunter and the others see Ventress as dangerous, but I think they're also scared she might take Omega from them. We've seen Hunter acting jealous before. I don't think Asajj is going to kidnap Omega, but learning the truth about why the Empire wants her could mean that she's separated from the batch in the future. They've spent their time with Omega teaching her all they can, teaching her to be a soldier, but she can't learn everything from them. The time will come when she will have to forge her own path, maybe without them, and that doesn't seem like something they're ready to face. So that internal conflict turns into something external. But you can't fight destiny, and Asajj beats them. I really like seeing her at this moment in her life. It lines up well with Dark Disciple. She's not evil anymore, she's not gonna straight up kill them, but she's also not all the way good either. Omega completes her test thanks to some help from Nature, aka Batcher, and returns in time to see the end of the fight. Ventress insists that she is not their enemy, and I like that she finds some common ground about the fact that they were all pawns used by the Sith. I love that Omega sees the potential for good in Asajj, and Crosshair is the one who calls her naive, because he is still struggling to change. Like Ventress, he is on the path of redemption and atonement, but he doesn't know how to be anything but a soldier. He is making progress, but I think he is still questioning whether or not he can truly reinvent himself. Omega convinces them to trust Asajj, and they go out into the water for a final test. Ventress tells Omega to try to connect with nature in the ocean while the batch spies on them, and I love that Asajj can tell that they're watching. It's another connection back to Crosshair, who mentioned that part of his own skills is knowing when he's got eyes on him. But Ventress also points out that the batch have been holding back this aspect of Omega. Not that they did anything wrong, it's just a whole side of her that they could never fully understand. Omega starts to grow skeptical of her teacher, so Asajj proves her own abilities in the Force, summoning a bunch of green jellyfish-looking creatures to the surface of the water, which in turn attracts their predator, a huge creature called a Vrathian. This was the sequence that made me most glad that I recently reread Dark Disciple, because it shows how much Asajj has changed since that story. In the book, Ventress has to teach Quinlan Vos to use the dark side so they can assassinate Dooku. Part of his training involves using the Force to connect with a black snake-like creature on Dathomir. Asajj demonstrates getting the snake to trust her, and then she kills it. She also teaches Quinlan about a creature called the Sleeper that lives in the depths of Dathomir's lakes that Night Sisters have to learn to dominate with the Force as part of a rite of passage. She also teaches Quinlan to kill it. In the episode, she now has a black snake painted on her armor. The Varathian has purple eyes with black snake-like pupils, and it's a similar creature to the Sleeper. Ventress does defend herself and Omega from the Varathian, but then she uses the Force to connect with it and calm it down, leaving it peacefully. It is a stark contrast to what she was taught on Dathomir. Before leaving Pabu, Ventress tells Omega she doesn't have a high midichlorian count and to consider herself lucky. But after Omega leaves, Crosshair suggests Asajj is lying. It's possible she's simply lying about not knowing why Omega is a target of the Empire, but I think the following conversation more likely suggests that the young clone does have potential in the Force. I mean, everyone does, but Omega might have a higher potential than most. We've been dancing around whether or not she could be Force sensitive the entire series. I've always been skeptical, but it does look like that's the direction we're headed. I like the way they're handling it so far if that's the case. I'm glad Omega didn't all of a sudden start making rocks float. The single test she passed was through her existing connection with Batcher, which I could see as a sign of potential, but it also just makes sense for her character. I think the answer is still up in the air, but if she is Force sensitive, I also like what it says about clones. From the start of the Clone Wars series, we saw Yoda telling his troops that they are all unique in the Force. Based on that logic, I see no reason why a clone couldn't become Force sensitive. It's just that they were never trained to be that way. I also think this could build up to a very emotional ending for the series. We've joked about the Bad Batch being the Dad Batch for 3 seasons. We've seen all these characters bond with Omega, introduce her to the galaxy, raise her to a degree where she has become very capable on her own. But as Asajj tells them, the time may soon come when Omega might have to leave them. If this series is about parenthood, this is how that story ends, with the child growing up and leaving the parents. That's the burden of all masters. They have to grow beyond you, whether you want it or not. Asajj Ventress is a harbinger of that potential future, and she is a harbinger of the fact that the Empire will keep coming for Omega. The past 2 episodes have been fairly peaceful, with Omega chilling on Pabu, but Asajj tells them that the planet isn't as safe as they think it is. Heck, her just appearing is proof of that. She snuck her ship in without anyone even noticing. If she can find Pabu, so can the Empire. As she departs, she gives us the closest thing to an answer we get about how she survived the events of Dark Disciple. She simply says she's got a few lives left. For those who haven't read the book, she is killed by Dooku's Force Lightning in an effort to save Quinlan Vos. In some close-up shots of her, I think you can maybe see some scarring that could be from that. Quinlan and Obi-Wan take her back to Dathomir, where they lay her to rest in the same magical water that held the Sleeper. That's the last we've seen of her. But Dathomir is strong in the Force, and Night Sisters are known for their ability to resurrect the dead. Usually they look a lot more like zombies, but just because we've never seen a resurrection like Asajj before doesn't mean it's impossible. I'm okay with not knowing all the details just yet. It doesn't really make sense for her to explain to the clones that she was dead once. They don't need to know that. The fact that they acknowledged it is enough for me right now, and I don't think we've seen the last of her. Nika Futterman, who voices Asajj, recently said something along the lines of her appearance in the Bad Batch being just the beginning. She could pop up again in the Bad Batch, or we've got a new season of Tales of the Jedi on the way. I think we'll get our answers eventually. But that brings us to the end of the Harbinger. It was a lot more chill than I expected an Asajj Ventress episode to be. I do wish we got more in the way of answers, but I still enjoyed seeing her again. I think the title was fitting because I definitely feel something ominous on the horizon, but I'm also ready to get to it. Next week, we're getting 2 episodes titled Identity Crisis and Point of No Return. A 2-parter makes me think we'll have some pretty big developments. Until then, let me know what you thought of this week's episode in the comments. If you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, follow us on our socials, and consider checking out our Patreon page. As always, thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.